Here's the KOMOTO X1500. We're going to show you how to remove the rear track and install the wheel. This is the first step. If you have the seat installed, first step here is obviously taking the seat out of the seat post. And then you have to take off this metal bracket and the rubber. Then we have 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all 4mm hex. So you have to take those all out, but what you first have to do is make sure you remove the battery. So we're going to do that. And then the battery is removed. The reason being is when you take this off, the battery sits up into the here with its support. So we have to remove the battery. Alright, so once you get all those out, you need to be careful because right here there's some wires that you don't want to wreck that are coming out the back. So this is the first step that you have to do to remove the track. The next step is you need to get your small accessory box, and then obviously when we switched out the front wheel there was also the rear motor in your secondary wheel box. So this needs to come out. So that comes out. Obviously before, like I said, we used a 4mm hex. You're gonna need a 5mm hex, and then you're also gonna need 21mm to remove these bolts. And those are the first few tools that you will need, because we're gonna be removing this brake caliper here, and then we're gonna be disconnecting both these bolts on both sides. We're gonna be taking the bolts out of here and in here, which those are 5mm hex, to show you how to remove the rear track here. Here's the rear track on the KOMOTO X1500 to show you where we're going to remove this screws here and here and here. They're all 5mm. So we also recommend disconnecting the cable here, so in that way that's out of the way so you don't forget about that. These two are included inside there. You don't want to do this one because that's the shock. So obviously lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Might be a little snug. This one you have to use 2 Allen keys. You can't use another tool because there's not a lot of room in here. Alright, so we were going to remove that, then you also need to remove this one too. This one you can cheat with the tool. So when you do this, you might have to lift up the track a little, put some pressure on it, but then this will pound through. Once you do, you gotta put some pressure on the track because track's gonna drop because a lot of the support's there. So make sure you don't lose these 2 pieces. Save those off to the side. Let's finish this up here. Almost be able to hand screw on it. So we have that bracket out now, okay? So you can remove the bracket for now, take it out of there. You could leave it attached here if you wanted to. If you did another step, we're just showing you this way so you can see how it's removed. Make sure you don't lose any of the pieces. I always recommend putting them in like this, screwing them in, then that way you don't have to worry about it. Same thing here with this mount piece. What I recommend doing. Just putting that in, screwing that lightly. Then the next step is put this back and then use the 4mm to tighten all these again as we're going around. So we're going to tighten all these. And that's a 4mm hex if you need to do that. So there's the step there on how the first piece that we will be removing. Here's the brake caliper. We are going to have to remove this screw here, which is the bracket, so the caliper can come out. There's a little hole here for when you have to adjust and tighten and stuff when you're setting it up. And there's also the other 5mm here, 5mm here. And then when we work our way to the other side, there's still 2 more. That's just so this bracket, because this actually expands open. So that's kind of an important thing to know. So we're just going to remove this real quickly. And that way it's less of a hassle. See, it pops off the rotor. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So that saves you some time. So the next step then is we're going to remove these bracket. Make sure you don't lose the screws. So this bracket comes off now. So that's an important piece. This bracket comes off. So set that off to the side for now for when we put everything back together. The next piece is we're going to have to take these 21mm on each side here, and we're going to take those off and just loosen them. So we'll loosen these. The track is probably going to fall a little, so be prepared for that. Don't freak out. That's why we have it up on the box that we use here for the wheels that come in. It's a good box that's good enough on height. So you have to loosen these and take these 2 off for now. Set those off to the side, okay? All right, so there's another piece now that we have to go down here. You can see these 2 screws on each side here. Those have to be removed and loosened on each side of the unit in order for this metal piece to push out. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen these first. And I don't always take them all the way out. I just loosen them. Because there's a bracket in there. Alright, this is where it gets kind of tricky. So it can either work in our favor or work against us. So what we need to do now is this has to pull over. Get you a closer view. This has to pull over this, as you can see how that's pulling over, and then that will slide out. So what we have to do then is you have to slide out each one of these sides at the same time. See how I'm sliding this? That's real important, okay? So what we're gonna do now, just gonna bring this thing up if I can. I'm gonna show you here how to stretch that open, okay? So I'm gonna pull this up and see how they both kind of pull. It can be kind of tricky. So if you get one off, one side, you know, you have to, it takes a lot of strength sometimes. So make sure if you're doing it, Try to pull them at the same time. That's the trick. So I stretched them both, and that's what you do. So you got to stretch them both on each side. So you want to pull one side and the other. Your hands might get a little dirty from the anti-seize. So then there's that. And then that's a step up to there. So the next step after that is you have to hit this wheel down, and then we'll go from there and we'll show you. Normally when you pull this off and stretch it in the future, after the first time, this metal piece will be bent out a little, so it'll actually drop really quickly. So right now you have to understand everything's kind of floating. The motor and everything should have already kind of dropped out. That's why I'm using this rubber mallet. Try to finesse it some, because the whole thing's gonna move. And there you go. All right, remember how we stretched that before? So you're gonna have to do that again here. Otherwise, your thing won't be put back together correctly, your track. So make sure you position the motor up in there. It can be tricky because you have to have it tight like I just did there. Get one side. You can see here how tricky it is. The tripod's falling on me. There's one side, and then two sides. So we have it on that side, and then we have it on that side. And now there's a few more steps that we have to do. All right, so anti-seize. That's just for the bolts and everything else. All right, it's 2 bolts that you used before. You're gonna need those when you do the rear wheel. What we're gonna do right now is we're gonna put this back together with the mounting bracket, so that way you don't lose any of the stuff in the future. So that's an important thing. You know, it also kind of keeps everything together. So I do that too, so I don't lose anything. And then also remember too, these back screws down here, you should tighten up those. So this is just putting the track back together for the future, so you don't lose any of your bits. All right, so now we have the track temporarily put together, so that way you can store it. Put that off to the side. And now we're going to show you how to install the wheel. For the wheel install, sometimes this might not be as wide because it gets bent in from the track, so you might also try to install this, and when you try to do that, you can see right here that doesn't fit. Okay, so what I recommend doing, as scary as it sounds, I'm kind of hitting this bad boy. Whoa, there goes the GoPro. Get some action there. But alright, you got some real life action there. Alright, so hopefully I got it wide enough, which I did. So it's just a few taps. Alright, there's a few different types of screws and nuts. These are the washers that you need. These are obviously the bolts, so it's not really screws and nuts, it's actually washers and nuts. Losing my marbles, what's new? So, rotor side obviously goes on the caliper side. So, rotor's over here, wheel goes up in here. So once we get that up in there, sometimes it might take a little bit of love. I mean a little bit of love, sometimes a little bit of love taps. All right, these hook washers, hang them. You'll see when we do that, hang them, that they're right on that side. So that's important, okay? You should also be putting in these other 2 washers in between. You necessarily might not need them, so I wasn't using them, because sometimes if you don't make it wide enough, your thing might not fit. We do recommend, if you can, to put them in there. You know, see how now it doesn't even fit? There, I got it to fit nice and snug. So that's key, to make sure you put those washers in there. I almost forgot. Very important. Then you take those bolts that you had in the back, hand tighten them, so that way things won't drop. And that's how we're there. Back to your 21 millimeter, just make it snug. You know, you don't want to strip the stuff and make it too tight, but you also don't want your life on the line. Connector, make sure you match it properly. You don't just want to just jam stuff in there. You'll regret that real quick. So screw that. Now we have the motor installed. Now we're going to show you how to do the brake caliper. Here's the brake caliper. This can be kind of tricky because you have to loosen these 2 to adjust it side to side, so that way it's not hitting on the rotor here. Obviously when it's spinning, you can see there's a hole here, that's where this gets mounted. You need to put the brake around the rotor first with the pads in between here. If you don't do that, obviously it won't go on. It might be easy, it might be hard. Sometimes with this, it's kind of luck of the draw. Sometimes when I do it, I'm like, oh my God, that's the fastest thing ever. Other times, I'm sitting here for 20 minutes. So I'm not gonna make any promises to you, like this step is an easy step, because it's really not. These brake calipers are pretty forgiving though. You can see right now how it's like rubbing. That's our problem. So included in the bag of screws, there's some extra spacers. So those extra spacers, you're gonna have to put in there. To make this tall enough. So what's happening here is it's rubbing. And that's because it's not high enough. So see how there's a spacer that just fell out? So what we're gonna do is there's some spacers out of the top of here. You can take these 2 if you want to be lazy, because you necessarily don't need it. And then I put 3 spacers there. And then I tighten this. Make sure you don't cross thread. It's pretty easy. Always take your time. So once again, you can see there's multiple bolts here. Took these 2 off because there's already a washer here. There's a spacer here that fell again. We're just going to use those 3. You know, you might have more on yours, give or take, because each one's kind of custom adjusted. Oh, losing stuff. You might not even need 3 in the back. I'm just doing this as a precaution to give it some more height, so that way it's not hitting the top of this rotor here. Alright. And this is where I said it can kind of get tricky, because you have to make sure that the red piece here isn't touching the rotor and the pads are all in the right spot. So that's something that you have to kind of tweak with time as you're doing it. Because you can see here, I got pretty lucky the first draw. See how forgiving that is? So when we take a look here, which is very difficult to see, you can see how the brake caliper will touch the pads or not, and then you adjust this left or right. Right now we got pretty good lineup. because it can be forgiving. And other times, like I said, when I do it, it can take eternity. So you can kind of just like look in there. So I can see here that this needs to be adjusted a little that way. And then that's adjusted. So now, see how we're hearing it rubbing? Because I didn't adjust it correctly. So then we're gonna do this again, and we're gonna slide this over. And see how we have no noise now. So you just kind of like keep loosening the bolt and sliding the caliper back and forth. See how we're awesome now? The other step then is when you're up here on the brake, there's this screw. You actually screw this screw in, and this will tighten your brake pads or loosen the brake pads. So that's a big thing to make it have more motion, like how this right now is really firm and nice. And that's because of the brakes and where they're adjusted with this screw. So we adjust that screw and see how you hear it rubbing? So if you adjust the screw a little bit more, you can change that and it'll spread the pads. And then you won't get the noise anymore. See how the noise is gone? So that's what that little screw does on top. So that's kind of an important thing. Now we're going to show you how to install the fender. Here's the rear fender installation. Rear fender comes in the box of accessories. This is the point to the bottom. It goes onto here, mounts over this piece. You get four 4mm hex screws that you're going to need that come in the screw box. So that's kind of an important thing. So what we're going to do is there's 1, 2, and then there's 2 more on the other side. So we're going to basically shove this over the metal. It stretches the plastic a little. And it's pretty self-explanatory here in the sense of you screw it into the screw holes. And so that you can get them to match up. So what I like to do is I like to hand put them in or loosen them a little, so that way you have some adjusting room. Because you'll see how it can kind of slide up and down. And then we'll go to the other side here. I always try to hand thread stuff so you don't strip screws. You know, you gotta be careful. So there's that. So now, like I was showing you before, this can kind of slide up and down, as you can see here. So as we're doing that, you know, you can adjust the fender and how you see fit. You know, if you center it up. I try to pull it all the way up high as possible away from the wheel. So like I try to pull it farthest up. And you want to be very careful when you're tightening this so you don't crack the plastic. And then that's how we install the rear fender. So you can see now we have the brake caliper, you have the plug that did all the top screws, we put the pieces back, then you install your battery again, and then you're good to go to use the unit. And this is how you install the rear wheel from the track.